In this video, we're going to talk about the sprinkler fundamentals required for design. We'll discuss when a sprinkler system is required based on the building occupancy type. So, there are different rules that are required depending on if it's, for example, a residential building, a cafe, a restaurant, a hotel. And I'm going to show you how to determine which occupancy type you have and which codes are required for that occupancy type. Now, all of these is going to be done based on New York City, so you have to check with your local codes for the requirements based on the occupancy type of the project that you are working on. Okay, the next item is discuss the different types of sprinkler heads. We'll then cover relevant codes on sprinkler design in New York City, basically where to find them as well. Codes that deal with sprinkler are in NFPA 13, which stands for National Fire Protection Association, NFPA 13D, which are the sprinkler codes for 1 and 2 family units, and NFPA 13R, which are for residential units that are 3 units and up, based on certain other things such as the floor height of these occupancy types, which I'll cover later in this video. Then we'll talk about sprinkler spacing requirements, sprinkler layout considerations based on obstructions and other special situations. So you can have obstructions such as a beam extending down from the ceiling, or something at the floor level, such as, let's say, a half-sized wall and not a full-sized wall. So you can have certain situations like that. Also, it could be light fixtures that are hanging from the ceiling, as well as ducts and HVAC equipment. That can all be considered obstructions, and there are different rules to where to place the sprinkler based on those type of obstructions. And also other special situations. So you can have things such as skylights, atriums, and different situations where there are different rules to sprinkler requirements in those situations. These are some of the main type of sprinkler heads. So you can have an upright, which basically is an upright head. You could have a pendant, which is a sprinkler that's hanging downwards from the ceiling. A sidewall, which basically extends from a wall. Or a recessed type head. So, it goes in a little bit more. And one thing is, you can't take an upright head, rotate it 180 degrees, and use it as a pendant. There's a different type of deflector, if you look at it closely, that is meant for the type of head that it is. So if it's an upright head, the deflector is meant to be installed in the upright position for the proper throw of water. So if you were to rotate this 180 degrees to be a pendant type, the throw of water is not going to be right. Same with a pendant, you can't take this, rotate it upward by 180 degrees, and then use it as an upright head. So this is what a concealed pendant looks like. So this part would go above the ceiling, and this deflector actually could be pushed in and out. So if somebody pushes this up with their thumb, right, they could just push it up. It'll basically slide up into the cylinder here, and then when they release it by gravity, the pendant will fall into this position. So this part is actually this part, and you could see there's this cap here that gets screwed on. So there are threads inside, and this will basically thread on, all right, pushing this deflector up into this cylinder. And the finished look would be like this. So this is considered a ceiling concealed pendant sprinkler type head. These are some other pictures of the different types of sprinklers. So you have the upright heads here. You have the pendant, recessed pendant. You can also have a vertical sidewall, which basically means that rather than the sidewall being attached to the wall, the pipe would actually extend out and then up, and then this sidewall would be attached to that pipe. You can also have a concealed horizontal sidewall. So similar to the concealed pendant type, you can have a concealed sidewall head as well. Sprinkler requirements based on occupancy type is per New York City Building Code 2022 at the time of this video, Chapter 9, Section BC 903. So if you were to go online and go to the New York City site here, you can type in the latest code. At the time of this video is 2022, but you have to use the current version of the code for your project. So 2022, you could go to the building code here, and chapter 9 is right here, and it's the fire protection system chapter. So this talks about sprinklers as well as fire alarm and some other things, but the sprinkler requirements are all in this chapter here, and it's at the beginning section of this chapter. So you can see here BC 903, and this will then give you all the requirements based on New York City code. So you have to use local codes for your project, which may be different from the New York City code. So if you look here, this is the group A, and the group A is divided into different group A's, A1, A2, and so on. And for each one of them, you have different requirements. So let's just look at this one for now. So sprinkler shall be provided for fire areas containing group A1 occupancies and intervening floors of the building where one of the following conditions exist. So you'll see the requirements here. So for example, the fire area exceeds 12,000 square feet, you would need it. The fire area has an occupant load of 300 or more. The fire area is located on a floor other than a level of exit discharge serving such occupancies. The fire area contains a multi-theater complex. So you could see that based on the occupancy type, the rules may change, right? So in this case, it's 5,000 rather than 12,000. And the occupant load is the same as this. And they have some other requirements, such as the aggregate occupant load of all fire areas occupied by Group A located on any given floor other than the level of exit discharge is 300 or more. And the A2 occupancy is used as a cabaret. So there's different requirements which you can find using this chapter here. So if you go down, you'll see other occupancy groups such as occupancy group B, which stands for business type, like offices, things like that. Group E, which is educational, and there's different requirements for that as well as others. There are also rules that deal with any building type. So just because the requirements for a sprinkler for a given occupancy type is not found here does not necessarily mean the sprinkler is not required. So you have to look at the section right here, 903-211, which talks about specific building areas and hazards. And an automatic sprinkler system shall be installed for building, design, or hazards in the location set forth in section 903-211-1, which is here, through 211-13. So all of these requirements deal with any building type. So just because a particular building occupancy type does not require it based on the sections above, it may still require sprinklers if it falls under one of these requirements here. So you have to check the entire section. So there's other requirements based on different situations, and if you want to get a full detailed explanation of when sprinklers are required, then you would have to read through this entire section. Building occupancy classification can be determined based on New York City Building Code 2022, Chapter 3. So if you had any questions as to what the building occupancy type is for your project, you have to look at your local codes for a chapter that defines what the occupancy classification is. So for New York City, it will be Chapter 3, Use and Occupancy Classification Chapter, which is here. So you would just have to read through each occupancy group type to see what occupancy type your project will fall under. So let's say we're doing a restaurant. We would actually read through all of these occupancy types, and we would find that it would fall under the assembly group, which is represented by A. So if you look here, there are the different A occupancy types here, which we saw previously in this video. So for A1, it would cover these building types: motion picture theater, symphony and concert halls. So there's a restaurant wouldn't fall under A1. For A2, it includes any assembly uses intended for food and or drink consumption. So it should be listed under here. So if you look through here, we'll see that it's cabarets, casinos, nightclubs, and here it is: restaurants, cafes, and similar dining facilities, as well as taverns and bars. And if you scroll down, you'll see different occupancy types, such as the Group B, which is it stands for business group. And you'll see what type of buildings are included within that occupancy Group B. And you can see it's just general offices. You can have banks, barbers, and beauty shops, electronic data processing, laboratories, motor vehicle showrooms, post offices. All of these would fall under the occupancy Group B type. So this is a chapter you would use to figure out what your occupancy building type is. And then you would go back to the Chapter 9 to see what are the requirements for that occupancy group type to determine whether you have to install a sprinkler system or not. So once you determine if your project requires a sprinkler system, now you have to determine, what the requirements are for the sprinkler system. And those requirements are based on the NFPA codes 13, 13D, and 13R. NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association. And the NFPA 13 are the requirements for sprinkler systems for all building types. And if you have residential type building, then you could follow 13D, which is a little bit different than the 13. There's also a 13R, which is also for residential buildings, but for 3-family and up, this code can be used. And it is up to and including 4 stories in height. So if you go into this NFPA 13R, you can see it's standard for installation of sprinkler system in low-rise residential occupancies. And if you go to this section here, it says this standard shall cover the design and installation of sprinkler systems in residential occupancies up to and including 4 stories in height in buildings not exceeding 60 in height above grade plane. So this 13R is basically for all residential types. So not just the 3 and up, but also 1 and 2. But the 1 and 2 can actually follow this code as well, NFPA 13D. And the requirements for this is a little bit less than 13R. So if you can use the less strict code, then it's sometimes better just to use that code. And in New York City, the code is based on these NFPA codes along with the revisions and modifications that are in Appendix Q of the New York City Building Code 2022 at the time of this video. So if you go into the code section, it's actually towards the bottom of the building code. And here is Appendix Q right here. Okay, so once you click that, you could see that for NFPA 13R, which you can quickly find by doing a Control F, and you could just go NFPA 13R, and you'll land on this section here, which is Q104, and it tells you which year that code is, right? It's 2016. So you have to get the correct year for the NFP 13R or whatever other code you're looking at. And these are the revisions that they made, right? So each section here has a revision listed here. So you could see that 1.1 was revised to delete after the word including and replace with the following: 6 stories in height in buildings not exceeding 60 feet. So if you go back to this 1.1, so after this word including, it's not 4 stories, it's 6 stories in height. So the New York City Building Code basically modified the when this NFPA 13R is required to be from 4 stories to 6 stories. And you can see there's other revisions that the New York City made to that code section based on this. So you can see section 2.1 was revised, 3.3.6 was revised, as well as all these other sections. So you have to look at a combination of the NFPA code plus this Appendix Q modification to determine what are the requirements in New York City for the sprinkler system. And you might have something similar to this in your local code for the particular job that you are working on. Okay, so now I'll talk about the sprinkler spacing requirements, starting with the NFPA 13 requirements. So for NFPA 13, you need 15 feet max between sprinkler heads, and that's basically provided in table 8.6.2.2.1. So that's right here. This is NFPA 13 codes, and this is the table 86221, and you can see the maximum spacing is here. And you always want to look at what the table is referencing. And this is basically for standard pendant and upright spray sprinklers for light hazard. So this wouldn't apply if it was a different hazard group. Not light, it could be a higher hazard group. And also, if you don't have a standard pendant or upright spray sprinkler, this table wouldn't be relevant, because let's say you had a sidewall, then this table wouldn't apply to that. So you have to make sure that whatever table you're reading applies to your particular case. But most of the time, we are dealing with standard pendant and upright heads. Sometimes sidewalls as well, but this majority of the time it is a standard pendant and upright. So the other requirement is that there is a minimum spacing between heads, and that's 6 feet, and this is the section that talks about that. Then you take half of the 15, which is the max spacing between heads, and then you get 7.5 feet maximum from a wall. Next, there's a minimum 4-inch from a wall. For NFP 13D, the requirements are a little bit different. The maximum spacing is 12 feet between sprinkler heads, but you need to follow the listing of the sprinkler, and that's what really matters. So the sprinkler specs can actually show that it can handle a maximum spacing that is greater than 12 feet at a particular pressure. So those are the requirements that need to be met for NFPA 13. It's all based on the sprinkler head type. But the minimum generally is 12 feet maximum spacing. Sometimes you can get more based on the specifications of that particular sprinkler head. And 8 feet is the minimum between sprinkler heads. So for 13 it was 6 feet, but the minimum for NFPA 13D is slightly more than that. And again, generally it's 6 feet max from a wall, so it would be half of the distance between sprinkler heads. That is the maximum allowed from a wall. And I'm stating generally because sometimes you could get a higher throw for that particular sprinkler model number. And all of this data is in the specification sheet for the sprinkler head that you are looking at. And there's also a 4-inch minimum distance from a wall. And this 4-inch is because the heat, sometimes it doesn't stick close to the wall. There might be a gap. So if you have it too close to the wall, the heat might not activate that sprinkler head quickly enough. So that's the reason for this minimum separation from the wall, so that it won't actually be in the area where the heat might have a hard time getting to. NFP 13R, the requirements are pretty much the same as for NFP 13D. And there are little differences between the NFP 13R, the D, as well as just the 13. And the purpose of this video is not to go over all the different code requirements in the different NFPA codes, but to just cover the major main common ones that will be needed based on my experience designing these type of systems. I wanted to go back to this and explain this minimum distance here, the 6 feet and the 8 feet. The reason for that is because if you have a sprinkler head here and here, and it's closer than the minimum of 6 feet, okay, or the 8 feet, depending on which NFPA code you're referring to, there is a chance that one head might actually cool down the adjacent head if it's closer than this minimum distance. And that could affect how effective these sprinkler heads will be if there's a fire. So if there's a fire, let's say right around here, and it activates, the heat basically activates this head here. But you also need this one to be activated too, since the fire is within the water throw of this head here. If it's too close, this head being activated first will cool this one down. It might have a longer activation time, which will then affect how quickly this fire will be extinguished. And that's the purpose of this minimum distance between heads. So here are some areas where a sprinkler is required or prohibited. All right, so we'll start with A. All areas require sprinkler except for elevator machine rooms, where sprinklers are prohibited by this section in the New York City Building Code. So the reason why sprinklers are not allowed in elevator machine rooms is because if it goes off, the water could actually affect the electrical equipment in the elevator machine room and cause the elevator to basically react erratically, such as opening doors when the elevator is not there. And if this occurs, then if there's a fire in the building and there's a lot of smoke, somebody may think the elevator is open and the elevator is there, but it's actually not there, and actually fall down the elevator shaft, which I believe happened, and that's the reason for this code, from my understanding. Now, go to B. It's top of elevator shaft typically does not need a sprinkler head. So if you look at this RCNY, which stands for Rules of City of New York, they have this section right here towards the bottom. Sprinklers located at the top of the elevator hoistway shall be of ordinary type, and it says automatic sprinklers are not permitted in elevator machine rooms, which I covered in A here. Upright pendant spray sprinklers shall be installed at the top of elevator hoistways. The sprinkler required to be installed at the top of the elevator hoistway shall not be required where the hoistway for passenger elevators is non-combustible and the car enclosure materials meet the requirements of this code here, which is basically for elevators and escalators. And usually the hoistway is made of non-combustible. They basically make it out of concrete typically. So typically the top of the elevator shaft will not need a sprinkler. So this is what a traction elevator is, as well as a hydraulic elevator. So the difference is, with a traction, you have a motor that has some sort of pulley system, and that will actually move the elevator up and down the shaft. A hydraulic is basically a system where you have a fluid which is actually pumped, and that provides the force to move the elevator up and down the shaft. So if this fluid is combustible, then you would need the sprinkler at the bottom of the shaft. Point C, bottom of elevator needs sprinkler, typically only if containing combustible hydraulic fluid. And that is basically from this section here. The sprinkler required at the bottom of the elevator hoistway shall not be required for enclosed, non-combustible elevator shafts that do not contain combustible hydraulic fluid. So all these three cases have to be true for the sprinkler to be omitted. And I have never seen an elevator that was not enclosed. Most of the shaft is made of concrete. So usually these 2 points are true. So usually the only time that you need a sprinkler at the bottom of the hoistway is if it contains combustible hydraulic fluid. Point D, sprinklers required in electrical rooms, and this is actually in section 903.2. So most people may think that a sprinkler system shouldn't be installed in an electrical room because if there's water, it could affect the electrical equipment, cause a shorting of the wiring, and cause some sort of issues. But it is required based on this section of New York City Building Code. And there are some exceptions to it, but typically a sprinkler system should be installed in the electrical room. And if you want to read up on the exceptions, you could just refer to this section here, 903.2 of the New York City Building Code. Now we're going to talk about some more sprinkler location requirements based on the NFP 13D, which is for 1 and 2 family dwelling units. The main section that deals with where the sprinklers are required based on this code is in section 8.3.1, where it states sprinklers shall be installed in all areas except where omission is permitted by 8.3.2 to 3.8. So it's this one, 3.2 to 3.8 right here. And so this is the main areas where we can omit it. Sprinklers shall not be required in bathrooms 55 square feet or less. Sprinklers shall not be required in closed closets, linen closets, and pantries that meet all the following conditions. The area of the space does not exceed 24 square feet, so 24 square feet or less. The walls and ceilings are surfaced with non-combustible or limited combustible material as defined in NFPA 220. Which is typically, the case. Something I want to mention is the codes in the New York City are based on this NFPA 13D as modified by Appendix Q. So as you read this code, you have to check to see if there's any amendments in this Appendix Q. So going to the Appendix Q, you could do a Control F and search for NFPA 13D to quickly get to the section. It's not here, but we could click next, and this is the section here. So looking here, it's 8.3.1. So we can go down here, 8.3.4 and 3.5. So these have been amended. So 8.3.4, which is this one here, has been amended to state, add the following after the word garages, provide that at least one sprinkler head is located within 3 feet of any communicating opening between the garage and the dwelling. So that's one amendment. And there's another one, 3.5 was amended to add after the word attics the words without floors. So this would basically read with the amendment that sprinklers shall not be required in attics without floors, with or without storage, penthouse equipment, as well as all this other information here. So it's basically saying that if the attic has floors, you need a sprinkler system because the code probably thinks that if there is a floor, it will probably be used for storage or some sort of living purpose, in which case you basically would need a sprinkler system. So now we're going to talk about the NFPA 13R, which is for residential buildings.